Okay, we should be on the air now. All over the whole world. Scary, huh? Ray got a little taste of technology this morning, didn't you, Ray?
Yeah.
How'd it go? Just generally.
Okay.
Okay. I told him he'd live, and he did. We are in Genesis 18. And we're going to begin with the first 8 verses of Genesis 18. Now the Lord appeared to him by the oaks of Mamre while he was sitting at the tent door in the heat of the day. When he lifted up his eyes and looked, behold, 3 men were standing opposite him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, My Lord, if I now have found favor in your sight, please do not pass your servant by. Please let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. And I will bring a piece of bread that you may refresh yourselves. After that, you may go on, since you have visited your servant. And they said, So do as you have said. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah and said, Quickly, prepare 3 measures of fine flour, knead it, and make bread cakes. Abraham ran to the herd and took a tender and choice calf and gave it to the servant, and he hurried to prepare it. He took curds and milk and the calf which he had prepared and placed it before them, and he was standing by them under the tree as they ate. Okay. What do we think about the first 8 verses there?
Evidently, Abraham saw something special about these 3 people. Because he said bowed to the ground. So he saw something special that they were, or whatever. It's hard, you can only surmise from this point. But it's interesting that he was the ultimate host, I guess.
It's this great man, Abraham, a great, wealthy, powerful man, seeing 3 people and becoming their servant.
Which is a little bit unusual.
It's striking.
Yeah.
And it's one of the good things to note about this, that Abraham, as we have seen good and bad Abraham, this again is good Abraham. He is humbled and really not just willing to serve, but desirous of serving, isn't he? He wants to serve. He considered it an honor to be able to serve these people. And that's an example for us. The first among you will be your servant. And, Jesus, there's a lot of bells that should be ringing from the New Testament in these stories as we go through them. One of the parables that I think we've kind of maybe gotten wrong over the last few decades or centuries or millennia is the parable of what we call the prodigal son. And it really should be the parable of the running father. What's notable about that in that culture, when you have status, and the culture doesn't change that much from the time of Abraham to the first century when Jesus gives his parable. It changes a little bit, but not a whole lot. Cultural changes were very, very slow, almost beyond our powers of observation to see them. But the father runs to the repentant son. And a man of dignity and stature in that culture didn't run, never ran. It was beneath him. Remember, they're wearing sandals. They're wearing not khaki cargo shorts while they're working, not pants, they're wearing basically gowns and robes. And so running was a was an undignified practice for a wealthy and powerful man. He'd have to cinch it all up and tie it up and everything, and that's how you would go for your jog. And we want our leaders to be, athletic and able to run or play basketball and at least play golf, I guess, get around the course in a golf cart, at least be able to do that, that type of thing. We want to see some vigor from them, but it was undignified in that culture. Well, here in this culture, what Abraham is doing is showing an incredible level of hospitality. And that's a theme that we're going to be revisiting in the next chapter, chapter 19, with his nephew. But what do you think is good hospitality right now? When not just for yourself, but when someone invites you over, you go over to their house for dinner. What's good hospitality? What do you think? It's hard on Alma because the food's never going to be as good as what she cooks. So it's going to be a little weak there. Okay, that's being a good guest. But what do we expect of hosts when they're being hospitable?
Well, if you're hospitable, you would ask your guests to come in and sit down in a comfortable chair or whatever, and of course feed them and with prime rib.
Prime rib.
And something like that, Well, you said a good host.
Okay.
Or whatever.
I've had somebody invite me over for prime rib before. It was very good. So I can't say I've never had prime rib as a guest.
Nice peach cobbler.
Peach cobbler is.
There you go. Top it off with a peach cobbler. But you would make sure they had the meal and polite conversation and whatever else they needed, really.
And who do we invite over if we're going to be good hosts usually?
Well, you invite members of the church to start with. You invite your family all the time. And every once in a while, you get a stranger.
Yeah. You don't go usually out of your way you look up, you see three people outside and walking down the street in your neighborhood, say,
You probably would try to holler for them.
come on in.
I just killed a fatted cat.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, it wasn't a short order cook. I mean, this was not fast food. I mean, when you have to go pick out a calf and then slaughter it and prepare it, it's going to take a few minutes into it, to say the least.
So he didn't give him hamburger, he gave him veal, huh?
Yeah. Veal.
Well, again, in our culture, we have our practice of hospitality of who we invite over, generally speaking, and maybe we can work to enlarge that scope of who we should be invited over. But it wasn't that long ago, people who were strangers, people who were traveling, would be invited by other strangers into their home. My grandfather, my mom will tell the story on him, Pawpaw, as we called him, was pretty notorious for bringing some old traveler or somebody in the area that didn't have anywhere else to go. He'd bring them home for dinner. He didn't call grandma on his cell phone first and tell her, I want to bring somebody. And Pawpaw and grandma were not Abraham and Sarah. They didn't have the fatted calf to go out and kill all the time. It might be grandma putting another cup of water or whatever in the pot of beans. It'd be pinto beans. The meat, a lot of times, was beefsteak tomato. That was the green onion and cornbread. So it was a humble meal. That's one of my mother's still favorite meals she can have. She doesn't even. She does not need a steak with that. If you give her that and it's good, she's happy with that. But Papa would just show up with somebody sometimes out of nowhere and knew them, didn't know them, whatever, So that wasn't that long ago. We are so different now in the way we travel, for one thing. We travel in our own cars or airplanes or whatever, and we make hotel reservations, and we have There's going to be room at the end because we booked ahead of time and we may have prepaid ahead of time. And what do we expect of the hotel when we check in? Hopefully to get our key quickly so we can get in our room and not see anybody until we leave, right? Well, their ethic of hospitality is a little bit different. First of all, you're taking in these strangers. You don't know them. You give them the best, really, the best you have. I think one of the funniest things is when Abraham goes into the tent and tells Sarah how to make the bread. You know, be like my papa telling grandma how to make the biscuits. You know, he didn't know how to make the biscuits, but he could critique them. He could eat them and say, "Oh, a little too much baking soda in this one," or every time. And everybody else is just, these are the greatest biscuits ever. But Papa could, he could tell if there was a pea under the mattress, so to speak. So he was that kind. He was a biscuit connoisseur, I guess. So this culture of hospitality, somewhat is what our expectations. But when you take them into your home, and we'll see this more next week, you take responsibility for their well-being. They are in your care. They are in your charge. Like I said, normally you go to the hotel, that's where you're staying. Hotel, hospitality, kind of hospital, hospice, all these terms are kind of related. We stayed at a hotel in Anacortes one time. It was really old. I don't remember the name of it, but it was very nice and very old. And I don't remember exactly what happened, but you felt differently than you did when you checked in at other hotels. You felt like maybe back 100 years ago where you checked in and, the hotels now want to get paid before anything. They want to make sure they're obsessed with your room is paid for and you've got a credit card to cover any incidentals. And they want to make sure these people, at least the way they presented themselves was more, you're coming into our space and we want to take care of you while you're here. Now that may have been all for show when the trouble came, it would have been different, but that was that was the ethic they wanted to put forward. That was the way, the brand, that's how they wanted their brand to be known. And that's kind of more in keeping with what's going on here. He promises them bread and water to wash their feet, and he puts on this big spread. He's giving them, setting their expectations and then exceeding it. But notice it says the Lord appeared to Abraham, and it appears there are three people. Now, when I was a kid growing up, I would have probably been taught this was God showing up with two angels. In most Christian traditions, this is seen as Father, Son, and Spirit. The three persons of the Trinity come to Abraham. I mean, Abraham's a big deal. If that's the case, Abraham's a big deal. Yes, sir.
And it is interesting. You think about it, and you consider Abraham, and like you said, he has his good days, he has his bad days, but there's always that thing, that part about Abraham, especially here. What was it that was so unusual that he immediately recognized that there was no, you didn't call you from God, you are from God. So it's a very positive statement. It's very clear. He recognized it. He knew who they were. And it kind of, it gives you a kind of a concept of Abraham that's a little different than the normal person. Abraham was somebody that had a close enough connection to God that he could see that. And that just, it fascinates me. Some of the people do that, but there was no question in their mind. They knew.
And we see Abraham at the end of this chapter. It's really, he goes to rock star status as a man of faith at the end of this chapter. And if he hasn't already there, he is at the very top. You see why these three guys, if it is the whole of the Godhead appearing to him, if it is Father, Son, and Spirit, we need to know the story of Abraham. And this is the father of our faith. This is the first one we really look at and say, this is where our faith comes from. We are descendants. We are children of Abraham, not by genetic composition, but by faith. Abraham is a really big deal. He makes mistakes, and we made fun of him, and we can question his practices, especially in light of our current attitudes and sensibilities. But that doesn't change his status. This is, if you're a very patriotic American, this is George Washington. I mean, this is, and you could do the same thing with George Washington, can't you? I mean, you can go back and look at his life and say, well, why did he do this and why did he do that? He wasn't perfect. But this is the father of our faith. This is very much someone we look forward to and should honor, even as we critique. We can look at him and critique him too, but we honor him. Now, I can look back at my parents and my grandparents. I try not to do it with my parents because they watch these videos, but hi, Mom and Dad. Nell says hi too. Nell's here now. But, you look back at your grandparents and they weren't perfect. They made mistakes, and we make mistakes too today. I just wish some of the young people today that are so intent on tearing down figures of history, I'd like to see what they have to say about themselves, or what their kids and grandkids have to say about them looking back 100 years later. Are you so sure you're perfect and you're right about everything right now? And yes, they are, because they're going to burn down your city to prove it to you. That's how right they are. But what is it, Mark? So, it's I think I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here tonight, but when we're trying to look at and evaluate and sometimes critique our ancestors, spiritual ancestors, genetic ancestors, we can do so, and we need to do it with grace and realize, in humility, and realize that we too are flawed, that if we are better than them, it's because we stand on their shoulders. Because we can learn from them, because they created a better place for us than they had. I don't know that we're currently doing that for our next group, that we're making it better. I don't know. Hopefully, in some ways we're probably losing ground. But, Abraham doing all this, talking about his faith, but look at Abraham, how busy he is. This seems very frenetic. He's running around all over the place. He also sounds a lot like Martha, doesn't he? When Jesus comes into Mary and Martha's house, Martha's running around and cooking and cleaning and getting everything, and she gets mad at Mary. I'm glad it's not the story of Tammy and Linda. It's Martha and Mary instead. But Tammy wouldn't have gotten mad at her little sister ever, no matter what you do. But there's this practical service thing that is a wonderful example. But as we see at the end of the chapter, there's bigger issues going on too. There's the story of Abraham and Sarah, which is very important to what's going on right now, but it's where Abraham and Sarah also fit into the world. Like we talked about Sunday morning, the whole universe is God's going concern. So is each individual life. Each individual human is made in his image. Every human life is a microcosm of the cosmos, in that God created it, and God has care and concern for it. The cosmos exists so that we have a place to live. It kind of, in a sense, serves us. Does that mean we don't serve it in return? That we don't try to keep it clean and try to pass it on and honor this gift that God has given us? I think it's a two-way street. So Abraham and Sarah, they have their little story going on, but it's being played out in a cultural sense, a national sense. We're going to see that, probably not tonight, but maybe next week. Let's look now at verses 9 through 15. This is the men speaking to Abraham. Then they said to him, where is Sarah, your wife? And he said, there, in the tent, where she belongs. Barefoot, but not pregnant, huh? There in the tent, he said, I will surely return to you at this time next year, and behold, Sarah, your wife, will have a son. And Sarah, being a naughty little girl, was listening at the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in age. Sarah was past childbearing. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I have become old, shall I have pleasure, my Lord being old also? And the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh, saying, shall I indeed bear a child when I am so old? Is there anything too difficult for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you at this time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah denied it, however, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. What do we think about that?
Now we had both Abraham and Sarah both laughing about it. They both had the opportunity to go, this is crazy.
They find humor in it, and I mean, it's kind of a humorous situation when we think about it. I mean, an old person, and Sarah not just being old, but bearing her whole life anyway, and now has gone past the age of childbearing. She's post-menopause. And so, once again, Abraham is going to be the father through Sarah. Okay, in a year, you're going to have a son, Abraham. Get circumcised. In a year, you're going to be a mother, Sarah. You're post-menopausal. I mean, this again, the prophets on Mount Carmel just pouring water on the sacrifice, just dousing it, saturating the sacrifice. How can I make this harder? What's the greatest barrier I can put on this? I'll take an old man and an old woman. The old woman's never been able to have kids, and now she's after menopause. Now she's after the change. Most of you ladies, menopause means taking a pause from men, and that sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? You can just get the men out for a while, and you can have a better life. Just take a pause.
You didn't hear that.
Our ladies love their men, I know. So this is God just taking it, making it so difficult, making it impossible. It cannot happen. It can't happen.
It's funny,
But it happened.
It's not funny because it shows the lack of faith. We can tend to do the same thing sometimes.
It is a failure of faith. Just as Abram, when they're in Egypt, she's my sister. And he comes back to that. That's the thing. We got the greatness of faith by Abraham. He stumbles again later on. It's a failure of faith. And then she lies about it too, doesn't she? I didn't laugh. Like a little kid with chocolate on the side of his face. Did you eat that candy bar you were supposed to save for later? I didn't eat that candy bar. Who told you that you were naked? She did. It did, you know. Always blaming somebody else. Always denial. I mean, she did it because she was afraid. She laughed out of faith, and the thing that walks hand in hand with a lack of faith is fear. The most frequent commandment in the Bible, do not be afraid. O ye of little faith. But it's so hard, isn't it? How can you blame an old lady who wanted a child so badly? She sanctioned a physical union between her husband and another woman. That's how badly she wanted a child. And now she's an old lady, never had a child, old lady, past the age of childbearing. And the idea, the prospect of what their relationship has been like and how it's evolved over the decades they've been together. It's not like it was when on the, first few weeks of wedded bliss, I'm sure. Now I'm going to have a baby? And Abraham? Does the Lord know what's going on with Abraham right now? Do you know what he just did to himself? In a year, I'll be back and you'll be holding your son. What if somebody told you in a year we'll come back and Karen, you'll be holding your son? What would you think? You say, I got 2 of them already. I don't need another one.
It would be a miracle.
It would be a miracle. Maybe not a blessing, but a miracle. Children and babies are always blessings, whether we realize it or not. Anything else there?
Verse 14, if you really summed up, I mean, it was read, even from verse 1 on down. I would say verse 14 really sums it up. Is anything too hard for the Lord? That's it. That's the answer. What we've been saying all along, that this is impossible. For man, this is impossible. But is anything too hard for the Lord? No. And again, it shows even today, you talk to people that say, I don't believe in God, and if you read this, you can understand the human frailty here. The human frailty is this can't happen. We've never seen it happen. We've never known anybody this happen. We've never looked at this going to happen. Well, it is. It's kind of, the Lord come out and saying, anything too hard? I mean, he made everything we see. He made the world. He made the universe. He made us. But somehow we lose that connection within the world until we, as a faithful person, I understand how Abraham said, yeah, I understand the humanity part of it too. This is really difficult. It's not an easy thing.
I mean, the lack of faith, the questioning does not come from so much a doubting of God, but from a reliance on your own capacity, your own abilities, your own reality. This is reality.
For us, it is.
Every month you got to sit down and pay the bills. That's a reality time, isn't it?
Except when you forget to pay them, you get a notice and I have to pay it. And there's the fact.
That's another reality, isn't
The
it?
reality is, I'm not saying on top of things like that. But we know our problems that we have, and maybe sometimes we accept them too much. We don't feel enough on what He will. That's kind of casting your bread upon the water.
Mhm.
We have to really learn, and it's not. Maybe you learn it once, you go over and over it.
But it's not, we don't, as people of faith, we don't get to check out from reality either, do we? We don't get to say, well, they're really God's, whatever happened, I don't have to pay my bills because God's going to miraculously, they're going to be paid.
Really last for living. Reality will say.
God feeds Israel miraculously in the wilderness. As soon as they cross into the land of Canaan, stops. Now, they still will eat from what they did not plant, drink from the cisterns they didn't dig. I mean, they're still very blessed by God. But the miraculous component of it at least changes. So we don't get to be detached from reality. but we're not bound by it either. And God is certainly not limited by it, by our reality, our understanding of it. I mean, I just think it's still, even with the chastisement of Sarah, such a beautiful story. Her laughter reveals, in a way, the pain at her plight her whole life. And you've heard me say that in the Old Testament times, women were wives and mothers, and that was it. Sarah, with all this going on, she's staying in the tent. She's not coming out. She's got her husband trying to tell her how to make bread that she's made. And be like me going and telling Alma how to make zucchini bread. You know, don't put too much walnuts in it this time, Alma. You know, Alma knows how to make zucchini bread. She doesn't need to hear me from. She's in her cloistered little environment that is fitting and proper for a woman at the time. And she still messes up. You know, why are you afraid to come out into the public eye, Sarah? I get made fun of even when I stay in the tent. So I get scorned and criticized when I stay in the tent. But how badly she wanted to have children. When Mary and Elizabeth come together and they're both with child, Elizabeth is a lot like Sarah. She's well advanced in years, beyond the age of childbearing. Is anything too impossible for God? God is repeating that miracle in a sense with Elizabeth. God says, is anything too impossible for me? Come here, Mary. You little virgin, come here. You're going to have a child. If your teenage daughter comes up to you and tells you, I'm pregnant, but I wasn't with a man. It was by the Holy Spirit. Where's your faith there? Well, we know reality, you know. So we don't get to check out of reality just because we're people of faith. But we need to allow God with our faith to transform our reality. Transform. If your teenage daughter is pregnant out of wedlock, take that. What many people when I was a young person, not that too terribly long ago. It's getting longer all the time, but you know, when a teenage girl got pregnant, it was a shame to the parents. I mean, it was absolutely, you were horrible parents. You let your daughter get pregnant. Nobody thought for 1 second, shame on the parents of the boy, you let your son get a girl pregnant. You know, that was not the ethic. You know, it was the daughter who had brought shame on her family's house, not the son. Now, in my house, I would have got a beating like you couldn't have possibly imagined if I had. I would have been in big trouble if I had done that. But it was not really a problem either. I wasn't the kind of teenager that girls just get all gaga over. So there was no real danger of it either. It would have been a miracle along these lines. The miracle was I found Sherry. That was the miracle. I found a woman that would put up with me at all. So, but we have these touchstones in our reality that we can't really deny. But at some point, we do have to trust God and trust Him completely. And Sarah's laughter is her pain. When Mary and Elizabeth come together, Elizabeth says to Mary, how blessed are you among women? You're getting to have a baby when you're 14 years old. I'm an old lady and just now I had to go my whole life. And for a woman not to be able to have a baby in that culture, we see it over and over again, a heartbreaking experience, because if your whole purpose in life is to be a good wife and a good mother, and you can't be a good wife unless you are a mother, unless you give your husband sons and daughters, mostly sons, and you can't do that, then what is the purpose of your life? If that's all you're good for, is a baby factory, and you can't be a baby factory. You can't produce one child. And Sarah's got all the money in the world. It's not doing her any good. It's not helping her fulfill her purpose as a human being. It's not helping her obey the Lord's commandment to be fruitful and multiply. Sarah cannot obey God. Abraham cannot obey God with Sarah. Because in their flesh, inherently, all people fail to obey God. There is no one righteous. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. And with faith in God, all things are possible. Nothing is too difficult for me. Nothing is impossible for me. This is a great story to cure barrenness in this elderly couple. It's a wonderful story. I got a story coming along down the pike a few years from now that's going to overwhelm this story. I'm going to show you my power. But right now, suffice it to say, in a year, you're going to be holding your baby. And it's really just too good for Sarah to believe also. It's just too much. Got to grow your possibility to believe. We get to look again through Christ. We get to look back at these stories on this side of the cross and see that God brought Jesus into the world through a virgin, that this Jesus he sent to us walked on water, turned water into wine, did all the amazing, fed thousands with this little boy's sack lunch, did all of these great miracles, was crucified and died on a cross, buried and rose again in 3 days, and then ascended up to be back with the Father. We're looking at it with that story in mind. The original readers wouldn't have had that. Just think if you're one of the early Israelites and you're reading this story or you're hearing it told orally, your great-great-great-great-grandmother laughed at God. She couldn't believe it either. And yet, here you are sitting around the campfire. Doesn't that make you feel important? That you're here because God did something beyond possible. And in doing so, he made your life possible. That's part of what's going on here anyway. So it's I think a beautiful story. It is humorous in some ways. And, I can just imagine Sarah's, I would have loved to have heard her laugh. And what would have made it so wonderful is knowing how misplaced that laughter was. Knowing that you're going to be laughing out of the other side of your mouth next year, Sarah, when you're not getting any sleep because the baby's crying at 2 a.m. you're going to be, I wanted this. And Sarah's so old, when Emily brings Gunner and Otto, she's got Tammy to help her out, and Sarah's mama's probably not going to be around to help with Isaac, so she's going to be on her own. She's probably got a few servants to help a little bit. Okay. You have something to say, Mark?
Nope.
Okay. Thank you for your attention and your comments. I'm going to shut us off, and then Mr. Hensley, will you lead us in a word of prayer, please?